may have surmised, I was not in World War II. I'm a Vietnam War veteran. But these folks were, and these are the daughter and grandson of a B-24 pilot with his logbook that they're going to read from today. But let's start by introducing who we are.
Billy Aker.
And where were you? What unit?
I was the 70th Trailblazer Division in the Battle of the Bulge.
Oh. And you, sir?
Bill Beerworth, Army. I got to North Africa about a week before the fighting ended and spent the entire Italian campaign there in Italy.
Captain Holtz?
I was captain of the infantry. Not at that time, I was a lieutenant when I went overseas. I was a replacement for the Battle of the Bulge, so I missed out on a real tough part. And I got in the combat area in February and finished up at the borderline of Austria at the end of the war.
And Marcia, tell us about your father.
Well, he was a B-24 pilot, as you said. Graduated from Michigan, and a few weeks later enlisted, and off he went to his training and ended up somehow becoming a pilot, which was a dream of his. And before he knew it, he was in the European theater. He was stationed in San Pancrazio in Italy, and he flew 50 missions over Europe, including over Germany and the West Raid and a number of other high risk missions, and then returned after that to a much different post in Miami Beach as the information officer for the rest of his tour of duty. So he had quite an interesting service. And
Now, this pilot was Bill Stegeth, and many of you, or some of you, may remember him as the voice.
of Michigan football.
Exactly
He was
right.
with WWII following.
So let's begin by remembering where we were at Pearl Harbor Day. On Pearl Harbor. It wasn't Pearl Harbor Day yet, but when the Pearl Harbor was attacked, do you remember where you were?
Where do you want to start?
Right here, this gentleman.
Oh, okay.
Work the line.
I was in school. I was studying to be a Catholic priest at Sacred Heart Seminary in Detroit. And so I had a deferment. So I was in school. And I left the seminary in 1944 and volunteered for immediate overseas duty. And the day after tomorrow, I speak at Turner Senior Resource Center on Plymouth Road here. And I take with me a survivor from Buchenwald, which I was with Patton with, and he liberated Buchenwald, which is the largest Holocaust museum in Germany. And Michael Weiss speaks in Farmington Hills at the Holocaust Museum real often. And his story is a chilling story. So, and I've been speaking for 3 years now at Troy High School and history departments in Troy High School. They invite me back a year ahead of time, so I make sure that I get back there. So I have an outline of the speech that I give every year. And I've spoken to lots of organizations in Ann Arbor here. The elderberries and the coffee hours at Turner Senior Resource Center, and different groups all over. And they're getting me into Pioneer High and to Gabriel Richard Catholic High School. So I'm in demand.
You are. Many of us are retired, you're in demand. And you, sir, where were you at Pearl Harbor?
I was finishing my senior year in high school on the 7th of December of 1941. Where I graduated from Redford High School in Detroit, and I guess it was early February of '42. I started at Michigan State, and my father, who was a lieutenant colonel, executive officer of an anti-aircraft artillery regiment out on the West Coast, wouldn't let me join the Army right off. He said it's going to be a long one to get all the education you can. He finally got tired of hearing from me, so he said, go ahead. So I entered the Army in January of 1943. In May, I was in North Africa. We arrived there just about 10 days after the fighting ended. We did not go to Sicily. We went into Italy in September of 1943, a week or 10 days after the initial assault at Salerno, and then we stayed there until the war ended in May of 1945. I returned home, went back to Michigan State, received my degree, commissioned as a reserve lieutenant of cavalry. The branch name was changed to armor in September 1950. On graduation, back on active duty, received a regular Army commission, was in the battalion, went to Korea in early November of '50, and headed home in February of 1951. And spent a year in the hospital, then was retired from the Army. Married a very lovely gal who had been a nurse at the Valley Forge Medical Center. 4 sons, all of whom have been Army officers. 8 grandkids, 6 grandsons, 5 of them, 4 of them Army, and 2 granddaughters, and 1 of them an Army officer. And so here we are.
That's terrific. Art, where were you in Pearl Harbor?
I was lying in a hospital in Galesburg, Illinois. I was a sophomore, let's see, it would be 41. I was a junior in college. Serious case of pneumonia. I was a year ahead in school, didn't know what I wanted to do. I was very late with touring, and had no idea what I was going to do when I got out of the service. I was lying there in a bed in Cottage Hospital recovering from a serious case of pneumonia, and I had the radio on, listening to the Chicago Bear Green Bay Packer game. They broke in to say that the Japanese were bombing Pearl Harbor, and I suddenly knew what my career was going to be when the war ended, because I was in the infantry ROTC. And we were called to active duty. We were allowed to graduate. The class after me, the 1944 class, was not allowed to graduate. They went in as juniors, and we were allowed to graduate. So we graduated in June of '43. Went to basic training, and then finished basic training at Fort Benning, the infantry school. Went to infantry ROTC. Graduated as second lieutenant in December of '43. Trained troops for a year in Fort Hood, Texas. Was promoted to first lieutenant. Went to Europe in January. Got up to where the fighting was. I went to 3rd Army headquarters, to a unit attached to 3rd Army headquarters, and General Patton's Army, and started in Hanau, Germany, and went through Frankfurt, Aschaffensburg, Würzburg, Nuremberg. I was in Nuremberg on my 23rd birthday, April 20th, 1945, the day it was taken, and finished in near the Austrian border. I saw Dachau concentration camp with the prisoners in it. The 45th Division took it, and I got married just before I went over. And Bob Martens, one of my classmates and an ROTC guy, was in the 45th, and I knew that, but didn't know. I knew he'd been hit twice, but I didn't know whether he was all right or killed or what. I ran into one of their jeeps, and he said, "Yeah, he's our heavy weapons company commander, and we're guarding Dachau. We took Dachau. So I'm there just days after the war ended, May 8th, and I think that was about the 11th or something like that. And that experience of seeing Dachau concentration camp, even though I wasn't there the day it was taken, I was there days afterward. Seeing that with the prisoners in it, and seeing what human beings can do to other human beings in supposedly civilized circumstances, it was a life-changing event, as the whole war was for all of us, and will be for any of you young people that have to be in something like this. You can't help it. But I felt very fortunate to, the old saying, I wouldn't do it again for $1 million, but I wouldn't take $1 million for the experience. But I think that, I don't know, I think I would speak for everybody, that those of us sitting here never regretted it 1 minute that I was there serving my country.
Wow. No, this is not a fair question to you. I was born in late 1945, and I'm older than you are, so you may not know where your father was. Well, but you do, okay,
I
please.
do know where he was.
You're just a kid.
I don't know much about it, but he was a student like Art. He was, I think, a junior. And he was at the movies and came out, I think it was at the Michigan Theater, and came out on the street, and everyone was in the streets, and it was pandemonium. And he said he knew the word was out that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, and he said he knew, like Art did, at that moment that his life was forever changed. And again, he was allowed to finish his degree, and then off he went.
He finished in May 1942 and entered into training, and a little bit more than a year, in July in 43, received his wings, and then his tour completed his 50th mission in August of 44. So he would have been 21 years old on the day Pearl Harbor was attacked.
Wow. Now, the B-17 was a bomber that flew like the Wright brothers intended. The B-24, which Bill flew, looked like a brick and flew like a brick. It was a tough airplane to fly. Did he comment on that?
In a few places in his mission log, he talks about some of the challenges of flying itself. And when he spoke to us about the experience in the aircraft, he did express, what's the right way to put it? My grandfather very seldomly broke Thumper's rule. He very, very seldomly said negative things about anything. And I think the way he phrased his experience flying the 24, that it was a challenge, but it was amazing they could actually get the thing to stay in the air. I think that's about as harsh as he ever was about the aircraft itself. But despite how harrowing the experience of combat was, he loved the flying, and I think that lasted with him his entire life. And he actually went up in a 17 last summer for the first time, and out at Yankee Air Force at the field out there, and he marveled at the experience, and so some of that comes through, even though his mission logs are minimal. They're very short, very concise. The flying itself was something that captivated his imagination as a young man, and stayed with him his entire life. And so it's insightful of you to ask about that, Lori, because the machines and the flying and the marvel of that was a part of what he took out of the experience and that carried him through the rest of his life. And then he became an enormous enthusiast for not just aviation, but but then the space program later. And I think he saw all of that as a painful but marvelous thing to come out of the effort. And it was based here in Michigan, manufacturing these incredible machines for an important but complicated purpose here in Michigan, out at Willow Run. And that stayed with him. And then when he explained, especially to my brother and I when we were young, talked about the experiences, a lot of it was through the lens of the pilot and of the flying. And that was his focus, especially when he was sharing the experience with us. Less of it was about the combat and the destruction, and a lot of it was about the marvel of flight.
So we have kind of an amazing opportunity this afternoon, but I might make this a little interactive. World War II is a world war. It's immense. Each of these gentlemen and lady have more than one story, but we could make this a little interactive and open up early to see if anybody has a particular question. We have 3 experienced infantrymen here, and the children, child and grandchild of a pilot. Who has a World War question that has always been burning? Yes.
So we live in an age now where digital stuff flies all over the place, and people can write from I've gotten emails from Afghanistan and from ships at sea. How was correspondence, and how long did it take for you to get letters out and letters back? Were there letters back? So how did you correspond when you were overseas, when you were in Europe? So it sounds like all of you were in Europe, correctly? What was that like trying to communicate with your family?
Letters, if you were lucky, 2 weeks. If you weren't lucky, maybe in a month you'd get, or 6 weeks, you'd get 6 or 7 of them in there. But then they came out with a scheme. It was called V-mail. And everybody hated the damn stuff. You had a regular form that you wrote your letter on. It was a 1-page deal. It was photographed and then blah, 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 back to the States and redone into print and sent back to your family, or if they sent one to you. And I don't know anybody who liked the V-mail. And we would much rather have something written, written by hand and come through. Even though it was 6 weeks old, you would much rather have it that way. But really, when you figure, we're talking 70-some years ago. And when you figure that flying across the Atlantic or the Pacific was a pretty big operation there. Ships took a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks to get there. And it did pretty good. But I know one day in Italy, I received a package from my mother. I opened it up. Well, she told me she was going to send it. And it was a pan of brownies. Right in the pan. And you know how long that lasted with my squad. About 30 seconds. And so I said, hey, they came through fine. And so I don't remember how many packages of brownies that came, but only one was damaged. When mail call, when I got this thing, the brown paper wrapping was soaking wet. So I assumed it was brownies under the grate. But again, you tried things and it worked there. But mail, I think, again, figure what situations were 70 years ago, it wasn't too bad.
It was,
Agreed?
I have something.
Yeah.
Hey, the main thing is that we got it.
I have something to tell you about the mail. Eventually, everybody was under Patton, and Patton made a decree when we were in the Battle of the Bulge, he said, "I'm sorry, but I need all of my trucks for oil for my tanks." He said, "You guys will not get any mail for quite a while, and you're gonna have to scrounge around for your own food." Now, I had a BAR, Browning Automatic Rifle, and so we went out into the German woods and shot deer, and that's what we had venison for quite a while until he relinquished his
Well, you know, that was, George Patton was a cavalryman.
yeah.
And in those days, the horse came first. That's right, the horse came first, and then the troops, and then the officers. So George Patton, when he had a bunch of tanks and half-tracks and artillery pieces and all that, the most important thing was gasoline, oil, and ammo. And the troops came after that.
And moving, what I remember, by the time I got there was a replacement for the Bulge. The Bulge was over. I missed that terrible casualties that were there and that close fighting. But when I was here, it was mobile, and the mail would be behind you as you moved, so you might go 2 weeks and not get any mail. And of course, all mail was censored.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody read, supposedly, I don't know if they did or not, but supposedly they read every letter that you sent to be sure that you wasn't disclosing sensitive material to your family back home.
Well, one thing that my grandfather often said was that his parents had the hardest job. He had 2 brothers, an older brother and a younger brother, all 3 of them in the service. And the family was blessed, all 3 came back. But my grandfather often said that having to be at home, and this was in Escanaba in the UP, waiting for weeks at a time with no word about 3 sons in different circumstances. The stress and the anguish of that and not knowing must have been terrible, just an incredible burden to bear. And my grandfather often expressed marvel, not just for his family, but for all of the families of all of the servicemen who had to experience that, because it wasn't, again, it's not like it is today where news comes instantaneously. It was weeks at a time where they just didn't know where their sons were or whether or not they were alive.
3 of us guys that had been friends since junior high school, and college. We're together all through junior high school, college, basic training, OCS. We were inseparable. And Bobby Kemp was going to be a doctor. Leo was good as a chemist. And they were both real good students. I was a very marginal student. Not in the top half of my class. I was not even in the top 10%. I wasn't even in the top half. I wasn't that half the class that made the top half possible. So,
Hey, join the crowd.
anyway, when I went overseas, I'd been training troops for a year. Bob was killed in Belgium in 1944, and about a week later, Leo got hit through the leg and got what they called a $1 million wound, and I was in Patton's Third Army also. Leo got a $1 million wound and we had to go back to a veterans hospital like they were working on here. And now I come home a month to go. They were hit. Bob was killed in November. Leo was wounded in November. I'd come home at the end of December to go to Europe. And my parents put on a good front, but I could tell that they were just devastated because they knew we were all such close friends. They were always over to the house and so on. One of them was dead, one of them was already. And I felt the same way that you mentioned about Bill. I thought it was real tough on the folks because well, I don't know about anybody else, but what I found was, I was scared to death before I went overseas, and most of us were scared at times anyway, but you get so busy doing your job, doing your mission, that you really don't have as much time to worry about it, the aftermath of what happens, but I felt that, the parents had a real tough deal.
I think actually that's why the radio, one reason that radio became so important to my dad, and why he focused on that when he came back from the war.
Do you have another question from the audience? Yes.
Hi. I'd like to thank you guys for your service, firstly. Secondly, our generation takes in all these war experiences through stories from you guys, and then additionally through media, be that movies, books, TV shows, whatever. And to jump off of your radio insight, I'm curious, what media have you guys seen, ingested, that embodies your experiences in war best?
None?
I can tell you what my dad thought, because he was looking from the perspective of a radio producer, and he was actually involved in early days of Michigan television too at the university. And he very much disliked the reenactments, and he was very much in awe of the material that was gathered, the genuine material that had been gathered, for example, by Ken Burns, and things that were made available through, both through NPR, through radio, and through public television. And that was terribly important to him, that he would see actual footage, actual film, and when he could not distinguish, when there were productions where they included both, and some was real and some was not, that was very disturbing to him. For what that's worth.
Now, you guys didn't actually see papers covering battles you were in real time, is that correct? Or were you able
Only
to?
one thing with me. I went over on the Queen Elizabeth, and the Queen Elizabeth and the Queen Mary were the two largest passenger ships in the world. The Cunard Line in England owned them both. They were sister ships. They held about 2,000 passengers. Listen to this. We had 17,000 troops on that ship. There were beds in the swimming pool. I was in a cabin officers had a cabin together, and we were, I think we were 8 or 10 officers in one cabin for 2 people. When you lay down at night, the bunks were so close, you had to make up your mind whether you were going to lay on your back or your belly, because if you laid on your shoulder, on your side, you hit the guy's rear end that's up above you. Everybody wanted the top bunk because that's where you could roll around. Well, when we got there, couldn't land at Southampton because of the bombing threat, although the skies had been pretty well cleared by that time. We landed at the Firth of Clyde in Scotland. It took 2 days to unload the ship into small boats. I got out the first day. And I had a group of men, not mine, I had a group of guys that they gave me in England and took across the channel and so on. It was like a company, but you didn't know any of them. And so we got down to the dock shed in Southampton to go to France, and the ship was late. It was in the early morning. We got off the ship, off the Queen Elizabeth early, and we were the first groups off, so we were right down on a train to Southampton, got in there about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning in February, and dark and cold, and the ship didn't show up. So now we're in the dock shed, and there was a bunch of blankets here from D-Day, and I saw that the men got those, and I was ill. It turned out I had pneumonia and didn't know it, so I went out on the street. And what I did, there was a newspaper guy out there, with the early morning paper, and I had some American money, and I bought a newspaper. And the headline was, "Germans claim Queen Elizabeth sunk with 17,000 American troops."